So I would invite now, as I mentioned in the chat, the speakers of the next session. So I'm asking if Charlotta van Troil is available and can have.
Yes, I'm ready. If
great, thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank all speakers, participants, and of course the organizers for this important discussion today. My contribution is a short description of one practical tool for public authorities for taking into account and hopefully protecting Sami traditional knowledge. So, in other words, the voluntary AkveKon guidelines were agreed under CBD in 2004. And one of their goals is to take into account traditional knowledge in the impact assessment when planning measures that affect indigenous people's sacred lands or lands that they traditionally occupy or use. So the guidelines include some important definitions, and they describe a process to ensure full and effective participation by the indigenous people. They also include a more detailed description of how the actual impact assessment can be done in a way that makes sure that relevant points of views are included. And now to how these guidelines are applied in Finland. So the Sami homeland area in Finland is 90% government-owned lands administered by Forststyrelsen, a state enterprise. The land is predominantly nature protection and wilderness areas, and Forststyrelsen must make plans for its maintenance and use. So Forststyrelsen and the Sami Parliament have since 2011 used a commonly agreed model for impact assessment of the plans on the possibilities to practice Sami culture. This process is based on the CBD AkveKon guidelines, and it was updated recently in 2019. Even before the guidelines, there was a procedure including a working group with broad representation, as hearings and an impact assessment. But to my knowledge, the biggest changes that AkveKon brought to the process was the establishment of a specific AkveKon working group, and this is very important, that the impact assessment is at least supposed to be done continuously, not just once after the decisions are already made, as before. And this Finnish AkveKon model roughly follows the phases outlined in the international guidelines. The planning starts with negotiations between Forststyrelsen and the Sami regarding initiation of an AkveKon process and how it will look. The Sami Parliament appoints the members and chair of an AkveKon working group for each plan. In the Skolt Sami area, the Skolt Sami Sida Council appoints some of the members. According to the guidelines, the members should represent different genders, generations, and be holders of traditional knowledge. The AkveKon working group contributes to the planning with information and studies on, among other things, situation regarding nature use, as well as Sami culture and traditional knowledge. And the group carries out the impact assessment concerning these matters. The group makes proposals that can benefit Sami culture and traditional knowledge or mitigate the harmful effects of the plans. The working group's positions are recorded in the plan, and if Forststyrelsen cannot take them into account, the chosen solution should be explained. The ACWECON working group's meeting minutes become public when the plan is adopted. The working group can define the material concerning traditional knowledge that is not included in the public documents. The working group, if needed with the Sami Parliament and the Skolt-Sami Sida Council, decide how the non-public material is stored and used. And lastly, I just want, or it's important to note that this ACWECON process, as applied in Finland, does not free the Finnish authorities from the legal obligation to negotiate with the Sami Parliament regarding measures that affect the status of the Sami as an indigenous people. So that was a very short presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlotta. These are very valuable slides and examples of how the ACWECON guidelines can be used. Now I would like to give the floor to Linda Lund in Norway. Please, Linda, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. So my name is Linda Lund, and I work in the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Norway. I am a lawyer, and I have worked in the ministry for 14 years, of which the last 5 years with national implementation of the Nagoya Protocol and with the Convention on Biological Diversity, Article 8J, on indigenous peoples. I'd like to express our thanks to the organizers for a good initiative and for inviting me to speak here today. Here I will present one of the national implementations of the Nagoya Protocol that Norway has done, which was to make regulations on traditional knowledge related to genetic material. The regulation came into force on 1st of January 2017 and have thus been in force for just over 3.5 years. The purpose of the regulation is to ensure that the interests of indigenous peoples and local communities are safeguarded and respected in connection with access or use by others of knowledge associated with genetic material. The regulations are based on the implementation of the obligations under international law on traditional knowledge related to genetic material in the Nagoya Protocol, to which Norway is a party. The Ministry of Climate and Environment prepared the regulation in collaboration with the ministries concerned and had useful consultations with the Sami Parliament. The regulation requires that a consent must be obtained before the commercial utilization of traditional knowledge related to genetic material held by indigenous peoples and local communities. Consent may be given on specific conditions. For example, that the indigenous peoples or local communities shall receive a reasonable share of the benefits obtained by using the knowledge to which the consent applies. So what characterizes traditional knowledge? It's that it has been developed, used, sustained, and passed on from generation to generation within indigenous peoples or local communities. In addition, traditional knowledge is often unique to or characteristic of indigenous peoples or local communities, or linked to their traditional way of life. This includes, among other things, technical skills, procedures, and
Jahtan saametikki presidentti Suomas, Ruosas ja Norkkaas. Puri Hassetouti ja Era Passevanti. Puri päivi mun puolestaan Maussulas seminaari. Charles sanatti sattun tuolla heidän sarvi. Videopakti inkipäässä Vassalasti milläkin tuossa seminaari. Teams-applikationer i taripaha toima mut ihtuus. Pian tanitsen sahkavuorossa teattu erinomaisesti raavaki märksumma ja olosuhtiin aina sodaa raavaki huosisi, niin koska arpeudus tiedu mahtsa hää. Pyrkistä tehtä sohpamusa assepellit juokkaama, lähtään ratsai tohkihan jälje, äktotahtolas raavaka. Manne muhtiin muuttui patjalaka. Nuppita se hektui. Raavaka läh opa maailmalatja tai hollasuhtima paras takalaki heivehuvo ieskuuteke riihka laaka hektui. Ja alkolmakin tili ja tarppui vainut. Raavaka läh valmustallun alkolmakin ja staahtai kaskavuuta outasparkkuus. Muhtota läh lontuus melte patsin vuulos valmustallun raavaka. Ei nappo rasseruohtastaa siis. Pajas kuului tahkojuvun raavaka. Raavaki karvaneemi ja tohkeämi lä joussuus ja saattes. Taninkata muistella arpyydus tiedun märksumi lassaanemis ja martusas biokulttuurilas mankalakapuutas. Ja tehalas, että raavakiitta oappas nuvu ja tai haltiin saakka suokkartuvu. Mutta vältkähtä raavaka ei takkaratjan. Läharpyydus tieduu ja maahtuu sotsele mai poremus feilos vuoki. Iso taimapijui vuodun kalkilla tarppuu ja takalkilla ouhtaikasatja konkreettalatja tarpplatja ja erinomaisesti toharikian arpyydus tieduu häikkaadit. Byrokrahtalas mäännutämi tehi tekniikkalas raaveen i tarppahuvo lasi. Alkoalmoki taavuus raavaka pukti lasi fumaisumi alkoalmoki kulttuuraarpai, mutta raavaka läh märkäsmähtuma, josta hei olla suhtu juo, tehdä heillä olla suhtun almolas ja kulttuurilas tiiliide. Suomalaiset haastelu sai puktaa että ektotahtalas raavakikkuun, ei sahte joutojuu ta haastelusa. Vain saamelaisia teive kulttuuriarppise torvasteemis. Joutuuskalkau nuohte reutoluvui laaka, halttaus ja parkui kalki tahkiitu tarpahassi resurssa. Lahka-asami erähuhtiin sami rektesajalka outilmi varas ja tampratsaisaihan suomus hui vaattes ja njoatsis prosessa. Taharpyräs tieto ja mahtuu mahtsami raavaka. Mai nammaa lää vaattiis jätnäluvuhke. Vuototuuve harpyräs tiedon tokaja merostallaami. Parku joku vuotote mai poremusvuuki hohtsama vaaras ja tehtelas olla suhtima vaaras. Lonttu vankkalkan vuota arpyräs tiedon siis Suoma, Ruosa ja Norkkasaamitikkin lää jeskutehlakan merostallaama. Nanne juvon oktases merostallan ikauno, mutta sirralkan tulkkoma lää mankkalaakaan. Vai arpyräs tiehtuu sahta sujjuvo, tehdä kaikkia merostallaan. Merostallan kalkkalilla aina saamelatja ja oktases, maan vuodun lää saamikielä ja kulttuuroijas tohvaka ja päivälas arkajälli. Tahkalkalla saamelatja ja ihmitahki ja lakas assi. Kiehtuu saamelatsai luontuu mankkahamsas vuotas kauno furhkiivun materiaalan mankkain sierra arkiivan. Sami arpuras tiehtuu kaunon patjuvun muistelusain luutiin järhallan materiaalas videoin maitte joukakovain ja taavirit joakin parkkuus joukon tiehtun ja materiaalin. Suoma Sami Almokis ja siinä kulttuuros teko tehtävässä mai Ruosas ja Norkkaas. Lää halmustuhtun etna tutkimuksen. Taavira ja kevähus sahta digitaliseerijuvo ja puktojuvo publisiteehta ola muuttui. Teko PD-suahmuusa raavaka puktekki tanasi jout. Mullen tutkan saamelotse vuokaiduoma talkaalla reutami outolas ja mut talaparkkusta. Mulla nauhtas tutkana parko johkuinan silken mo talkaalla reutan vaihku arvioidus tiihtui ja saami kulttuuri. Vuokaidu on nää kulttuuriseera huom. Pares arvivieru jauke ja ottaa vieru rekaati. Suokkartallaamus leenai taas, että jos tieto mahtui ja taapi, hallituvui mahtsahuo. Nu sahteko tahantajuvu herra huon tiliin, vai leako tarppas heiveri taapi ja arvevierui ottaa tiliin. Hassi lonttuu mankalkan puhtii kullevas tietoin ja mahtuin, lä jauhkan mai lahka reutoisai käätsil, ja ossin mai helli ja sattumalta takas tahpahuon erähuvaami käätsil. Kun arpevirros piutaili pyytiin lä iltojuvun ja sämmas lahpota helli männutä mai identifiseerimi ja piutui kullevas saamekielellas terminologia. Maittain materiaalai hapnoi kiehtatui tuojis kullevas tiehtuu ja mahtuu lävaraavalta jauhka. Arpevirros tietu mahtsa mi annui isahti tahpaa huohtyssö raavakikkui. Suomosaamia almohla unni ja Sami servosa peilasvuota vassalasti eskutehlakan toimokottie lä raajaavatsiat. Arpevirros tietu äikkarin lä taalaikki huistura haastalusa, että se helahusa ja arpevirut tuolahmis. Ja outamehkä tihte potsosaami lähdemmas tiimaa talveaikki, että se retsimä rauttamus saajiin vattes talvekuhtun tili kietsi. Arpevirros elahusaikkuin pareki pajastolle saamikiela ja arpevirros tietuu ja siihen ohtas raadi tietoservosiin sahti tulkki vuuki arpevirros tietui ja mahtui furkkemaan sirtiima ja mahtsahemmi vaaras. Arpevirros tietu mahtsahemmi isahtelehtyssä tjaalalas mennutämmi, mutta kaipilahtela mahtsahu annui arkaelima vuossi. Arpevirros tietu mahtsahemmi kalka taahpahua saamelotsa johtui melte. Teikä nuohtekasta manna sinluusaa ja hullosin tarkku ja saavalta. Arpevirros tietu mahtsahemmi kalka vuototutkamus Tanjalaakin, että taas saamiservosa tohkehämmi ja vuorovaihkuus. Arpevirros tietua siis koutaisvuohki pukti harpivierui ja taapi, oltaisi hapnui ja autti ihtei saami ohpaussistolui, siis kerinomaitsi hautasparka ohpausas arpevirros tietu äikkaalikkui. Lämmä maussulas vomiihi, että nyt se takkar tiehtuu tehe taapi sahti mahtsavuu, maille tarppaus joulu tiehtui ja maille funksuuno taalaikki mainnis. Mahtsahi mi ilä hohtatsirkkula saatsi, tanin arpevirros tiehtuu taapi ja kevaata. Ei läs taaldaansa, mutta täällä hahtanussaan nuhisseros, kun täällä haikkisnä. Taapi ja keväti ahtanussaan lää tehalas chilkejuvu, vai sahta iinetuo maikta maaksi, millä te hannu ja tarassi mai suokkartuo mo mahtsahemmi parkojuvu. Suomas läholla suhtun akvekuun raavaka, Nähtsäraatahusa nos hamitikki ja norstalatsai siitä soppara kaskavuoda ohtasparkku. Ohtasparkkuule toiman mähtsäraatahusa nutanjuun staahtahaltisen äänami tiksuuma ja kevahusa plaanemis. Mutta alma merita valtti tiksuuma ja kevahusa plaanemi raavaka. Äilä lasihan saamilastoimia passalastin vuoda tettikke. Akvikon raavaka äilä heivohuvun viita laavaraahkaremis teke arealla plaanemis eikä eräske koulu kevahusa plaanemis. Ottaisemus toimupetjumi, koska arvostelu mahtsahämi läska plaanejuvumme Suomessa allekin Suoma ohpous ja kulttuuriministeriö parkkuus vastaa seminaara lää oktavuistus alkolaukki. Saamitikki ja nuortalatse siitä sopparlepa puhuttaus toimi, puh toimain, koska saamelatse arvostustieto. Saamitikkillä almustuhtan etsis raapaki tutkimusprojektai lohpemännulle mai, niin koskaan saamelatse arvostustieto. Raapaka lähpuhkai ouhtolakana, leijal tutkii saamelaste i, ja saamitikki sahta pitää merratusastis rautajohtu. Lähti harrasvaltiin vuhtiin, että loppaluoppas arvostustieto äikkaadisellä voikavuhta merri taas. Mun suusjoukon tiedon kevahuvuihin. Sahtekota luopahua automarkkatihtä arkkivaje ja makkariahtui, kun arvostelu äikkä huolkaa projektaa ja mieltä. Saamilikki ja nuortalatse siitä soppa räppäsahti pitää rautajahtui, vaan vuosista arvostelu äikkällä voikahuola merri taas mo siisojuun tiehtuu sahta antajuun. Arvostiehtoo sihke kollektiivilas ja individuaala, jotka alkavalta jo vuhtii puh tutkimusas projektain ja mai raavaki aasahämmis. Suomessa raavaki heivehämi saamelatsee vuotoektun läht vuotolaahka, saametikkelaahka, nuortalaslaahka, sihke riihke kaskasas sohpamusas, kuskas kulttuurarppi ja tehtäväs vielä almuslas sirralaaka. Lohpas saamitikki ja nuortalatse siitä sopparas sillä merrivi. Harppahuvui ihkö suomasvalto no jotaraapaka vai sahtako kulttuurarppi sotsi puorituu etsalaatse. Riihkäiskaskasa servuus juovuu ja se kalkaa raporteerijuo suoma olla suhtaa. Biodiversiteetti sohpaun saa kätnekäs vuotaidissa, mutta muainut mausolatsamus ja kauan takkarmaalle, niin tuorjuu saami kulttuura ja arvioidu säiluma arkaellius. Raavaka, lohpepaa, piretja ja toimukatti ei lähtarppahassi. Tarppahuvi resurssa, arvioidus tiedon, talatili kartemi, saamikulttuura volkkasajin, tietoihin mahtui furkkima ja outasparkkuu, arvostieto äikkaali kuin tiedon mahtsaämi, säiluma ja outrimeen varas ja rahuvan tiliä. Saavan tikkiä miellakittavas saakastallaami tehas faattapirraa ja saavan, että oktasas tavirihkas outasparkkuu saami arvostieto sotsilämi varas outanyhti ja keuruli. Saami kulttuuri ja identiteettillä maussulas, että saami arvioidus tiehtuu ihmirtuu sammalaatsi ja tämän torvaustani varas tahkojuvi ouhtalakan toimapiju. Kiihtuu perustumista.
Broader issues where we also get into questions of land rights and indigenous rights in a broader concept. So when we talk about the Convention on Biodiversity, the Sami Parliament is involved and engaged in the work at both national level and also global level. So we participate in the Swedish delegation and we contribute and participate in the development of the Swedish positions to negotiating meetings. And we also have ongoing discussions with the Ministry for Environment to become the national focal point for Article 8J and 10C, which are the main articles in the convention dealing with traditional knowledge and customary sustainable use. And a few years ago, also the Sami Parliament, together with the Swedish National Environment Protection Agency, had an assignment to propose suggestions on and measures on how to better implement these articles in a Swedish context. And one of the cases and one of the examples that we highlighted in this report is something that I will share briefly about, which are the reindeer husbandry plans. And this is a tool that has been developed with the Sami parliament in close cooperation with the Sami reindeer herding communities on the Swedish side of Sápmi. And it's a tool that is online, like a mapping tool where the reindeer herding communities can describe and communicate their land use and their needs based on traditional knowledge, and then to be able to use this documentation to visualize their rights, so that their rights are secured in spatial planning, in environmental impact assessment, and also in permitting processes. So these reindeer husbandry plans, they classify lands that is used within reindeer herding. So these are mapped based on the traditional knowledge within a community, which lands are used at what times, and what kind of lands for grazing, for calving, and so on. And this is also then based on field inventory. They also are able to describe the type of grazing lands and also the boundaries. And it also includes information on GPS positioning. So it's a mixture of adding together the knowledge from the reindeer herders with the knowledge that we have about external factors such as climate and weather and so on. So this is in this mix, we can have a broad and more comprehensive image of what the traditional land use actually looks like. So if you could please then go to the next slide. I would just briefly outline then some outcomes that we have seen and that we are working on. So for example, in these plans, the reindeer herding communities are able to show how the land is being used. And then that is something that can then be looked at, for example, when we talk about mining, or it has been used in court cases on wind power plants. It has also been used in forestry activities as well. And what is important to recognize when we talk about traditional knowledge, that this, and this is I would like to stress this, that this is information that is owned by the reindeer herding communities. It's their tools, it's their plans, and they are the ones deciding to whom they want to make this information available and who they want to share it with. And the Sami Parliament's role is more of a facilitator in this process. So we are enabling the communities to develop these plans, and we will also provide the technical expertise and also help with databases and the server to store this information. But it's really something that is a bottom-up perspective, where the communities own the data and decide who gets access to it. So we already see that these plans have been applied in decision-making processes, and how it's then increasing the ways of involving the reindeer herding communities when decisions are being made that affect their lands, that affect the lands that they use for their livelihoods. And this, of course, then brings us to something that I also noticed had been discussed already, how to fit the traditional knowledge in the context of a Western science-based knowledge system. And that is something that has been one of our major challenges in this work, to actually get the majority society, to get courts, to get government agencies to accept and recognize this knowledge as valuable as science, and to also understand that what the reindeer herders are showing, what they're telling about their reality and their everyday life, that is something that the authorities have to take into considerations when they make their decisions. So this is something that we see that these plans have been contributing to somehow even out the unleveled grounds, playing grounds, and to achieve a more equal status between science and traditional knowledge. And we also have examples when we talk about large carnivores and predator, where reindeer herding communities have been able to predict the percentage of their loss of reindeer calves. And then there was a team of researchers who did empirical studies of the same thing. And what the researchers found was actually the same conclusions that the reindeer herders had already presented. So this is just a way of transmitting the traditional knowledge in a language that might be more understandable to those sitting in these positions in government agencies. So of course, then when we talk about these issues, and it has been mentioned that, okay, we cannot separate environment from culture, human from nature, and so on. So of course, the use of land is the basis of culture, is the base of language, and the other way around. And that is also how we see these reindeer herding plans has increased the respect and recognition of land rights, because in many cases, it's the knowledge that is lacking. The people who are making decisions about land use, if they don't have the information about indigenous people's rights, if they don't have the knowledge about how lands are being used, how knowledge is being transmitted, and if they don't know about traditional livelihoods such as hunting, fishing, reindeer herding, and so on, then of course they will not be able to make these considerations when they make their decisions. So this is also a way of actually visualizing and showing the rights of the Sami reindeer herding communities to their lands. And of course, as this is a seminar on the traditional knowledge, and as has been highlighted in the chat, we have the Sami Language Week all over Sápmi. And that is also a very important tool or a very important outcome of these management plans, that they help revitalize the Sami languages and also help to promote the intergenerational transmission of traditional knowledge. And maybe I can give an example that we have been talking about yoik here today as well. And some of the reindeer herding communities incorporate also yoik and cultural expression in their reindeer husbandry plans. So if there is an area which is very strongly connected to a cultural expression, to a yoik, for example, it's possible for the reindeer herding community to record the yoik and to add it into the plan to get the connection between the culture and the land. So to highlight this link is also a very important characteristic of this tool. So yeah, this is just to share one example from us, what we are working on. And this has been also received some attention international as well. And I'm looking forward to future discussions in the afternoon. Thank you very much. Kiitos.
Thank you very much, Matilda. Your presentation was very clear, and thank you for having it in English, even though the Sami Languages Week is ongoing, and there are 9 Sami languages actually. So the North Sami is only one of them that has been used today. And I really thank you for this presentation. I hope that the discussions in the panel will touch also upon these possibilities to share different sorts of ways of improving the taking into consideration of traditional knowledge held by the communities and the Sami.